West of What is a round-table conversation inspired by Mother Earth's call for more landwork ceremonies to happen. This is a podcast where spirituality lands into politics, history, culture, and more, because land is where we all meet. We want to know how we can come into greater connection with the land and each other, and how we can all move forward with integrity. We believe the answers and solutions will come from many voices, from the truths that happen inside of our togetherness. Hello and welcome to West of What. And I am so honoured and tingling with excitement to say that Natalie Vickers is joining us today. Natalie's way of working has been described as holding out her hand with trust, as if to dance people across an invisible bridge. Natalie is a rites of passage guide or midwife, a practitioner of old ways, a ceremonialist, a homeopath, body worker, and someone who happens to dance at the drop of a hat. I have had the pleasure of being in this woman's company and wisdom several times, and I know that this episode is going to be enriching on a soul level, and deeply, deeply inspiring. And so the only intention I can offer this introduction is, may this episode inspire you back to old ways and enrich your heart and your soul. Thank you so much for coming on West of What. I'm so excited to talk to you. I want to start with what does old ways mean to you?
So you haven't started with a small thing then. Wow. What does old ways mean? Yeah, that pause is just about, it's trying to sit with time. And the old ways are the ways that we as humans and as a species on a planet, beautiful planet with thousands of other creatures, and how we have existed, and those old ways have sort of bled into our culture. It's into the way that we think and feel and sense the world, and those, they really mean it's the way in which we live, the way in which we experience ourselves as a being, a human being, on a planet. And for me, they sort of translate, or they come into action in terms of animism. It's sort of knowing the world is actually a lot of energy caught, as it were, in a particular shape just for now, and how that shape sort of moves through time, and how we are all interacting with each other. And those old ways, they understand that interconnectedness of everything. So it's really prepared to step into the unknown places. It's prepared to step into the dark and the potentiality of the unknown. And it embraces it actually with some humor, often. Very matter of fact as well, often. And there's massive dollops of magic. It just accepts that, the unknown and that which is coincidental is can be beautifully crafted, can be wrapped in ritual and ceremony. And so those old ways are really in tune with nature. They're full of song, they're full of dance, they're full of rhythm. Oh, I could go on and on and on.
What I want to know, so the reason I started with that question is because I remember having a moment, this was a long time ago, where the New Age movement kept being referred to. And there was this moment in me where I was like, but it's not New Age, it's Old Age. This is the old stuff that's just coming back on in modern day consciousness. And that was quite a profound moment for me when I kind of reclaimed New Age as Old Age. It gave me more right to it, I guess. And I just wonder, for anybody listening, if you have a definition of what makes something old age.
What makes something old age? Well, the first thing that falls into my mouth, and that's kind of how spirit works with me, is it's the stuff that you know, but you don't know why you know.
That's very good.
Yeah, and it's the stuff that's kind of when if you put it into a visceral sense, if you actually feel it within the body rather than just words, it's the stuff that sits in your bone. It's the marrow. It's that old. You know, your ancestors, my ancestors, physically sit in our bones. And so those old ways are carried around by us all the time. So part of the old way is to find and maybe remember, you use the word reclaim, could be voiced in so many ways, reattach, rediscover, lots of re's, I guess, but to go back into the bones of things. And to trust that actually what's sitting inside of us, that old way will somehow work its way out, and it comes out often in ritual and ceremony, and the way that people like me work, in a way, I guess, or the way that we are with the work, is to offer that into self-generated ritual and ceremony. And that's the really fascinating stuff, because then somehow the traditions that used to be held by our ancestors can come through if we can get over ourselves and just trust what's in the bone. And then that feeling of I know it, but I don't know why I know it, just can flow, can come through us. And for your listeners, I'm making this gesture as if I'm sort of like I'm bouncing up and down, and this
bouncing. And what do you mean by self-generated?
Well, it's for me, often most of my work takes place out in nature itself, and there is people would say there's a huge disconnection that's happened between how we are in the world now as modern humans and how we used to be. A disconnection with the earth, a disconnection with the old ways, the traditions and or ceremony and or ritual. And I mean, that's a huge conversation in and of itself. In a secular society, we don't often wrap ourselves around ritual and ceremony, which are the ways that give us meaning and significance to anything. As the simple act of having a cup of tea when you're cold could be considered a quite a ritual for us. So when we don't do those things, there's a sort of there's an emptiness, there's a lack of things. And so what we can do is that we can turn into ourselves and discover from ourselves what is the ceremony that wants to be generated within. So when we're working with people on the land, they may have pain or grief. It could be really intense suffering. It could be a sense of not knowing. They may want to return to painful times of the past, or they may want to bring something in for the future. And what we do is we facilitate a space where they go out in nature, where there's no distraction, there's no food, in the really big immersive stuff. There's no food and they're alone. And the ceremony that somehow encapsulates the feelings that they have just literally just comes up. It gets generated from within, and they find a way of doing that. And it can be so beautiful, very simple often, but powerful.
And can you give an example of what kind of ceremony someone might do alone on the land without food?
Well, here's the thing. When you're sitting out there and you're acting as that midwife and you're guiding, the stories that come back are really precious. They're sacred. Mm-hmm. So there's a part of, it's not for me to share someone else's story, but I can share one of my own.
Please do.
Okay, so one time I went out on something called a vision fast, which was like a 4 days out in nature alone. And I had chosen to do that in a very, different climate from my own. I needed to have something that was going to be super edgy for me. And it was part of a training into being a vision fast guide that I did in Northern California. So I'm in a very different climate.
It's beautiful land, I have to say. That land is amazing, Northern California.
Yeah, very, very high Sierra, I think is what they call it. And, I was in a place where I sat and I couldn't see anything from any direction. I could just see this track that we had come in on. It took us 4 hours to come off a main road to actually end up in this place called Eureka Valley. And I was there, I was in this training, but I was also, I had to start with an intent. Mm-hmm. And my intent was to find this central part of myself. And as a mum of 3, someone who's been doing this work a long time, sometimes I've had to juggle lots of different things. And when I went out, I found myself rather serendipitously carving a bead for every child I made.
Wow.
And I did one every day. And I happened upon the wood. It was in my rucksack. I carry a knife all the time, but I didn't know that the wood was there. And it just burst out of me that I realized I had not actually done an act of celebration for each of the children that actually my body had made. And that was a self-generated ceremony that came out that I didn't even know was inside of me.
And what did you do with the beads?
Well, I put them on a leather string, and I put them on my wrist, and I said I would never take it off. I would just let, if it fell off, it fell off. And sure enough, in time, every single one fell off. And the really interesting thing with that is that each time a bead fell off, something was happening with one of my kids, and they were moving and shifting. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, I mean, the land loves a bit of jewelry magic, I have to say. Like whenever I've been wearing jewelry in a ceremonial way, the end of that time with that jewelry is as magical as the beginning initiation, like it's always my guides go on about how everything is symbolic, they're like, if you break your phone, it's death and rebirth. It's like everything is symbolic, and so when you lose a piece of jewelry, there is symbolism in why, there is symbolism in, that time is done, this time of me integrating, assimilating, honoring, whatever it is complete. And usually there's, whatever that jewelry is related to, there is something in the map of the life that is reflective of that.
I would agree. I mean, I had a really good lesson about that, in as much as as part of, the work that I've done over the years, I've sat with other medicine men and women, and I've learned in different different apprenticeships and different style of what is called shamanism. But for me, it's easier for me to call it. It's more animism in action, really. So it's also those healing practitioner arts. And as a practitioner, I can have some tools that I've either made or tools that have been gifted to me. And they help me when I'm working with someone. And they could be all sorts of things. They can be rattles. They can be little nuts, for example. I've worked a lot with nuts.
I don't know how you work with nuts, but
okay, that's another story.
And then continue on.
I'll come back to the working with nuts. But this one was about one of the medicine men saying, that if I lost my tools for me to do my job, it wouldn't stop me doing my job, even though I would have invested maybe a lot of time and worked with the spirits with the tools. But it's not going to stop me from doing the work. And I happened to meet this really interesting man called Dusty Miller the 13th, who's known on these islands as the Celtic shaman. He's got a really amazing relationship with trees, right? So I get this really rare opportunity to go and meet him about, I think it must be about 10 years ago. Anyway, so I get the opportunity to buy a tiny piece of blackthorn, which still has the dryad, the tree spirit in it. And so I have to buy it, but I bought it, and it went into my little medicine pouch. And I was out on a pilgrim walk, and I loved the pouch, and I loved, obviously, this tiny little blackthorn stick. It had some runic language written on it as well, and it meant a lot to me. And I lost it, and I had a bit of a thing about the fact that I'd lost this really beautiful thing. But I realized, sometimes these things, they come to you and then they go. They have their time. And I learned to not solely invest everything in some tool that actually the spirit world is going to be using these items, but it's not fully dependent. So yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I think there's also, and I do want to hear about the nuts, but I think there's also something profound in, sometimes these tools, they're lent to us. And there's something profound in them being taken back when they need to be taken back. And in some ways it's like that. I always feel that tool is then inside me. I don't need the external tool anymore because I've fully integrated that tool or that piece of jewelry. I actually I did some land ceremony in Egypt, and I was told I had to offer gold. It was the most expensive offering I've ever made. And at the time that I bought the gold, I also bought some gold for me to wear. I bought a golden ankh for Mount Sinai and a golden ankh for me to wear. And the ankh went on top of Mount Sinai. And then what was amazing is this 2 years of land work that was really between Sinai and Glastonbury was taking place. And the whole time I was wearing this golden ankh. And then in the completion ceremonial days of the 2 years, the second ankh, the one I was wearing, disappeared in a Glastonbury. I don't know where I lost it. It just disappeared. And obviously you'd think he'd be upset about gold. I should be on a personality level. But there was something so beautiful to me about the fact that we'd spent 2 years of doing this ceremony between these two places. And one of them, which is a more masculine energy, I know exactly where that ankh is. I buried it myself. And the other one got lost in the great mystery in the very feminine energy. And it felt like it was always meant to be that way. Like I couldn't even be upset about losing gold because I was like, that's part of this. So, you know, that was meant to be on my heart and it's in my heart now. And now it's there in the mystery of Glastonbury.
Well, you know how I hear a little bit about what you've said and how it feels inside of me is that, and if it's okay to kind of share that, it's sort of what I'm sensing is that there's an enormous trust in allowing something to fall into the mystery, and how that happened in Glastonbury too. For me, is like these islands of ours, they're full of like these incredible cracks. The cracks where, the mystery has held itself in the old ways, over centuries of time. And sometimes I think the magic things need to keep falling back into the cracks. And so when you spoke about that, for me, there was a light sense, oh, this feels right. There was an absolute rightness about that. Yeah, beautiful.
I love your image of the magic things need to keep falling into the cracks. Why? Why do you think they need to keep falling into the cracks?
Because that's where the darkness resides. These islands are, for all sorts of reasons, why the old ways have become old ways and not current ways. Like going back to what you're saying, why is this new age when it's like actually really old time? Whether that's down to conquering, whether that's down to enclosure, whether that's down to what happened to the women at certain times of our history and past, and all the layers that sort of kept going on top of it. Even if you were able to strip all those out, there's something about the spirit of these islands which is very swirly. It's very inny outy. It sits in these amazing clefts. It sits in the cracks and the caves, and it resides in the silhouettes of the blackness of the tree against a sort of dimpsy, twilighty sky. It's just that's how it feels. When you spend a lot of time out in nature, these things become quite apparent, and I sense them in my body. And so they become part of like, I know that it's true, but I don't really know why I know that it's true. It's not as if the old ways and the people that were working on these islands have directly whispered it into my ears, but maybe they did. They didn't necessarily write it down in great books. But I feel that when we go out there and we're on the land, we do ceremony on the land, it just, I don't know, honey, it just like comes up through the cracks and then it wants to fall back down. It doesn't want to be brazen and out there all the time. It's much more subtle than that. It doesn't mean to say, I don't know what you feel, it doesn't mean to say it isn't fierce. It's usually quite fierce. It has some might behind it. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that the most real moments of my life have been ceremony with land. That I cannot think of any. There are times where the magic has been so real, it's been more real than reality. And I don't know how to put that into words other than tell anybody listening to go and experience it. Because it's so real that it makes reality feel unreal.
Yeah.
Feel mad and feel many things. And
I can understand that. I think the word that I often use is that everything can feel quite ridiculous. I was only talking to someone last night and that's where we ended up. It's like everything else seems quite ridiculous, really. And I wonder, considering about this conversation and the reason why you created the podcasts about about, some, not necessarily urgency, but maybe some urgency, but the importance and how relative it is to what we are doing or what we think we are doing for ourselves, how that really needs to happen in a certain place. And why that place, why land. And I look at it often and sense it as because it is literally common ground. And in a land where there's so much dissonance around difference, for example, we have to really literally physically stand on common ground to actually start breaking the spells that have been in existence for hundreds and thousands of years.
That is very, very powerful as an image and a statement.
Yeah. And for me, what happens in those spaces, I don't know what it is for you, but there is an opportunity, at least. It's not a guarantee. It's an opportunity to really discover and to be in union with our common values. And name what they are, say what they are, rather than just to assume that we know what it is. And for me, they become very simple when you're out in nature, super, super simple. It seems to be complicated when I put myself in a box of a room or in a house or, so the more time I spend out, that's a better reality. Like you just describing it, it's so real, and tangibly so.
Tangibly
so.
To the point that, like, nowadays I feel sad when I have to go back in. Like the fake reality. Like now, these days the fake reality being the human reality that isn't in ceremony with the earth, while the real reality is happening. My experience is I feel like the land just the land loves us to be in ceremony with it so much. And if we all just did a bit more ceremony with the land, so many things would be I believe so many things would be sorted out for humanity, because the land's just waiting for us to come into ceremony, and it can't help us unless we do. That's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, so can I share another story that you've just touched by what you just said there? So thank you for saying what you said, because it's sort of like it. I haven't spoken this story out publicly, so this is quite.
We're on it.
It's an exclusive. And it came from. As you know, I spent 2 years living out in the wild, traveling around in a camper van, listening to the land, at the trees, the creatures in the ground, listening to people. And one of the things that happened was that I was up in Scotland and I was listening, and I was on a glen in a super wild place, and it was so beautiful. It was in February. Brilliantly clear sky, and I went there one day and I was absolutely in awe of the beauty. Lichen hanging down from 2 feet long, hanging down from branches of a tree, water cascading over rocks, quartz everywhere, it was just like idyllic. And I go back and I'm all blissed out and I'm thinking, oh my God, it was so good. And I go back the next day and I have a completely different experience. And what happens is that I call her Great Mother Black, she put some things in my mouth, which is how she works with me. And she said, why don't my children come off the path? Why don't they play barefoot in the wild? Why aren't they back in the old wild garden to learn? And I fell to my knees and I just cried. And even in this beautiful wild place, and I understand the necessity for sustainable ecology of, the erosion paths of humans going out, but there was this real call from our mother to say, why aren't you back in the wild playing and learning? And it rendered me, still for hours. I just... And as beautiful as that experience was, I was racked with grief. So I think that one of the things that happens when we go out into the land, and I've experienced it a lot, is that people experience a huge grief when they start working with the land.
Not just us, also our mothers.
Yeah. And then I just want to, and I don't want to sort of stop that and move quickly onto something else, but I do want to mention that from when I was out in my van, I stayed close to the coastal roads. I was really sort of right on the edges. And what I discovered was that that we always talk about the land. I mean, I'm a wilderness guide. I'm out on the land all the time. But we're actually a water globe. We rarely talk about what it is to be with the waters and the salty waters. And so I kind of want to give a nod to all the water that kind of mixes with the land, that if it wasn't for the land, the water wouldn't exist, but the land would definitely not exist if it wasn't for all the water. And the cycles that revolve around water and earth are so important. And for me, there's a key here. There's a key to healing something very old, some very old healing to be done about the waters, especially of these islands, and maybe for other places too. But these islands are my home. These are my ancestral home. So, I don't know. What's been your experience about the relationship between the land and water and ritual and healing? And
it's funny, water's coming to me. The last couple of years, channels have been saying to me, it's about to be about water too. And we have done ceremony with water, but I believe that this new age is an age of reflection, where we are able to create through the divine reflection or through the beloved reflection. And therefore, water is the great reflector. So I'm, at the time of recording, I'm in Japan, where we're going to do land tantra. And one of the days is with Fuji-san, but the other day is with the lake by Fuji-san. Because we can't start coding the age of reflection without working with the water as well as the land. And water's many things, isn't it? But it's life. It is life, whereas land's actually death. Land's actually alchemy.
Yeah.
I
totally agree with you. I mean, I'm a lover of rot.
Yeah, in terms of creation, we need water. Like we do. We need to work with the water for sure.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, for me, there's so many story in myth and folklore around, the Black Mountain Lakes. How they are nature's first mirror. And so much can be seen by the questing journey up to the mountain lake in order to look into the depths of the dark of the water of the mountain lake. And what would you see beyond the reflection. So you're seeing the reflection, but you're then going beyond reflection. And you know, I don't see these things as metaphor anymore. You know, for me, this is going back to what you were saying about the reality. This is actual reality. And yeah, these systems in nature, ecological systems in nature, just show this great connectedness and relatedness. And so, of course, it's going to be about water. Of course, it will be about other things too, as everything is, you know, related in that regard. And fantastic that you're out working in Japan, doing tantra work on the land. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, the work that's about to happen, 7 years. And I know that you wanted to speak about rites of passage, and so maybe this is the right time. Why did you want to speak about rites of passage on this show?
That's another biggie.
I agree with you, by the way.
Oh, okay, that's great.
I agree with you. Like, one thing the land teaches you is rites of passage. You know, one of the things that the land teaches you is that we live in the modern world. We've got used to this idea of instant manifestation, instant gratification, instant. And one of the first and major things that I find every time I work with land is the land does not do instant. Like, it might do breakthroughs and it might do insights in it, but actually the true process is nearly always a passage if you want to work with land ceremonially, in my experience.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. You know, classically it's thought that a rites of passage is a time, a marking of, say, a human's life stage, and it classically again has 3 stages. It has one of severance or separation. It has one of like a testing time or a time of liminality, when things aren't actually quite as you want them to be, but you're in that space. Maybe that's what you're referring to. It's like, I want this, but it's not quite here. Or I'm wanting to create this. It hasn't quite fully formed. And then it has this third final phase, which can be described as incorporation, being that it's of the body. But it could also be described as like a return, a sort of like that something that you went out to find something or to create something, and then somehow it's come back to where you started. So it's a beautiful image of like a loop or a spiral or a circle. But why do I feel they're important? Their absence, I feel, their absence in many cultures around the world, the abuse of rites of passage, the taking away of that through conquering, for example, that has actually affected how communities grow, how communities exist. And going back to what we were talking about in terms of shared value and shared common ground, if we, for example, as a species, if we had a rites of passage which took us all into adulthood, that was a shared experience, that was equally out on the land, so we get to understand our relationship with our mother, and the other beings that live out there, then we would have a shared foundation upon which our communities, our culture, our societies could actually then stand on. And I happen to believe, with all of my fury, with all of my tenderness, that the fact that we don't have as many rites of passage that are honoured and that sweep across for everybody, it really affects our sense of who we are, how we are in the world, how we belong, how we feel, what's important. And
I would say it affects I believe it affects it disrupts our evolution, in our personal and our collective evolution. To me, it is actually horrendous that we are being led by leaders who haven't done rites of passage.
I totally agree. I mean,
I
could just say yes.
That is how you come into spiritual adulthood. The reason we have teenagers emotionally, energetically blowing each other up is because we don't have adults in leadership roles because they haven't done the rites of passage that they should have done.
Yeah. I think what's important is that there are lots of questions around, what constitutes a rites of passage, who holds it, what is culturally appropriate, how can individual communities create rites of passage which work for them, and then what's the bigger collective outside of that. I do feel that part of the rites of passage, there needs to be this really strong liminality. I think, traditionally that's the testing time. It needs to be hard. It needs to be difficult. It is a bit of a northwest passage. It's a kind of like tight, squeezy place where all the things that you thought, patterns, habits, addictions even, they get squeezed out and you get left with the essence of the intention that you went out with. And it's that adversity that we must have in order to actually have a more wholeness about our sense of what has a shared and common value. And they could be simple things like truth having a roundedness to it, like respect having a depth to it. And we can determine what they are, and different communities can determine what they are. But without it, it's like we're all going off on different tangents. We become obsessed with ourselves as individuals. We don't see ourselves as a collective, because the returning part of a rites of passage is where that individual goes out, has an incredible experience about the change that is occurring within them or the change that they want to bring in. And then they bring back that sacred story and share it. And that's how the community evolves. Like you said, it's how communities remain fresh. And we need our communities to constantly look at our value systems to make sure that they're fresh and ready to meet whatever the challenges are as we move forward. That's evolution for you. I also think that the thing about severance is the hard bit of a rites of passage, because it's my experience that loads of people, I've worked with thousands of people, they want change. Couples want change, groups want change, even organizations want change. Actually doing it is really hard. And invariably it means that something has to be let go.
Yeah.
Something has to die. And in our cultures where we don't sit with the messiness of death and the uncertainty and the unknown and the rot, going back to you said, like, death happens is what's really going on in the ground. When we don't actually allow ourselves to dive into those dark, craggy, difficult places, we just stay above it all and we don't want to let go. Well, then things can't remain fresh. We're not in the cycle of, people talk about the cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth. Well, I say it's birth, life, death, rot, and then rebirth. The earth, like you said, the earth goes a little bit slower. You have to have a rot, and we are programmed to have disgust about foul things, and so being a rites of passage guide, going out into nature can show us those cycles of death and rot. And we can begin to realize that this is actually part of our passage of being human, as being a spirit being, having a human experience. And then we can actually take flight into our spiritual relationship with everything. But if we hold on to what could be described as the more childlike fear around our death, and a conditioned death as well, or just the process of rot and entropy, if we are scared of that, scared of the dark, it stops us from the great potential
that comes on the other side of the rot.
Yes, exactly. That new birth.
That the rot becomes.
Yeah. And in a way, that's where the nut comes back in.
I was going to ask about the nut. Tell us about the nut.
Well, actually, the nut, I use the nut. I went out as part of my shamanic training. There's maybe some of your listeners know that in the arts of, or the healing arts of shamanism, there is an understanding that a part of one's soul can get severed under complete stress or very poor health or trauma, really. And the bringing back of that part can be done by a medicine man or woman. In fact, it can be done by the person or those around them if it's done soon after the severing. And me, as that medicine person, when I would go to retrieve that part, I needed to carry it in something, and it got carried in a hazelnut. And that hazelnut was came to me when I was out in nature, asking my spirit guides and asking nature, how do I do this work? How do you want me to do this work? And so that's when the hazelnut, literally dropped in on me.
Did it literally fall on you?
Yeah. It literally just like, oh, there we go. I was sitting under a hazel tree. So just want to put that in. And what happened was that somehow I knew, and I don't know how I knew that it needed to go inside my belly button. That when I did the work, I placed it in my belly button. And then I had a little sort of a belly button thong or something, I guess is the way to, just like a belt that would go around to keep it in my belly button. And so that would be my tool to do that work. Now, what really is in that, and I try not to overthink these things. I just try to sense what it is. But in the work of being a rites of passage guide, there is a bit of knowing that what you're really doing when we go out into those liminal spaces, when you're in that testing space, you're really stripping everything away like winter does, like death does. It strips it back right to its essence. And what's inside that nut is the essence of the next hazel tree. The essence of a human really is captured, is held in their soul.
And I want to ask you about this just knowing, because I feel that too. Like I can go to a land and I just know what, like, it's like ceremony just comes to me. What is needed isn't pre-planned. It happens when I'm with the land, and suddenly, and some of it is channeled, but actually a huge amount of it is a knowing in me that this is the right thing to do, and that the land wants me to do it. And it's, and I want to ask, where do you feel that the land is telling you what to do, that it is, or that it's some ancient memory in our DNA, or it's a symbiosis of you and the land? Like, where do you think this knowing comes from personally for you?
Well, just listening to what you've just said, my sense of it is that it's all of those things and more. Having had the experience of watching many people come back off the land, having done self-generated ceremony that somehow has risen up inside of them, and then seeing the effects of that because I'm not really interested in just doing it so that you get the t-shirt and you can tell a really good dinner party story. I'm really done with that. For me, when ceremony is done, when the intent is clean and clear, so it's got to be clean and it's got to have, you've got to have really clear intent. Then when the ceremony is done, it sticks. It gets rooted into someone's life. It's got to, otherwise, what's the point? What's the investment that the person's made in both of, time, spiritual energy, investment from the separation away. So I feel that it's many, many different elements. I think there are many things in the proverbial, cauldron pot that go into making that ceremony either arise in someone or somehow, just make itself apparent. Sometimes the ceremony, like me, it was made, when I'm making those beads with a bit of wood that I'd forgotten I'd got in my rucksack. But when I'm out on the land, I'm often making things with the land and then leaving them as some kind of offering, as an acknowledgement of what I feel. But my actual sense, if you really were to push me, honey, and say, what do I think it is? Yeah, so what's again landed on my tongue is that there is an innate knowing inside of us that we all have the potential to be in ceremony. Yeah, and I just want to leave it like that. We all have the potential to be in ceremony. And sometimes, why I'm a guide, why it's called midwifery, is that, we might need a little encouragement or support to get us out into those wilder places, or to get us out solo, or and for so many people, there's a lack of trusting, perhaps, because there's a forgotten type of listening to the sort of things that pop up in a human's body and comes into their mind. You and I, we just trust it. We just go with it. But, for so many people that I've worked with, that trust is something that can be robbed from people. It can be denied. It can never even grow. It doesn't grow in a person.
And this,
so that, sorry.
Well, I just want to say, because I feel like this is where the passage comes in. Like, the going into the liminal is where you learn how to trust.
Yeah, you have to.
You have no choice. When you're in the liminal, you have to trust. There is no other thing to do.
Well,
and I feel like then our rites of passage being taken from us is why we now have such a collective trust issue. Because at the age or the ages or the stages where we're meant to increase our trust, we are not offered the ceremonies that would teach us the trust.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, gosh, it's such a... Well, look at the language around trust. You have to earn my trust. What kind of language is that? It's not, it's not giving the ownership of trust to us as individuals. And of course, we have to be put in situations, or we have to find ourselves in situations, like you're saying, in those liminal testing times where we do trust. And in the dark, when things haven't quite formed, we have to, that's there are times when, as children, we can be offered the opportunity of turning off all the lights, not having the hall light on and the door open so that there's a little bit of light that comes into our bedroom, and trusting that the dark is okay, it's safe. It's actually where we come from. We come from the dark. And
everything is born in the dark.
We were born in the dark. We return to the dark. There's more dark than there is light. And the interesting thing about what you're saying is that we go into that liminality of a rites of passage. I know that as the mixture between grandmother and grandfather medicine. So the grandfather medicine is really a bit like it's the hermit that is shining a light way across the moor. So for your listeners, I'm just on the edge of Exmoor at the moment. So imagine it's a misty late in the day, and you're a little bit lost. You know, you don't quite know where you are, but you know roughly where you want to get to. And so you have an intent, but you don't quite know how to get there. And then this light, a hermit's lamp, is across the moor, and it twinkles at you. And that's the power of grandfather medicine, the power of intent that takes you across, you know, the threshold and takes you into these unknown, can be boggy, misty, difficult, exposing places. And we need that mixture of the grandmother dark and the light of the grandfather to actually get anything done. And there's something about working with thresholds and rites of passage work that seems to, it has some kind of entirety to it. I can't really explain it. I've been doing it a long time, but I'm still an apprentice to the work. Every person that comes back, their story is like a little bit of a chink of light and a chink of the dark, of the wholeness of it all. And I'm constantly learning how vital it is for the harmony, the symbiosis that you talked about, for that to exist here for all beings. You know, we're the ones, when I was out on the moor the other day, and I got greeted by about 20 Exmoor ponies. They all surrounded me. I was out there singing.
Wow.
It's very wet. There I was just sitting and singing. And they came up, they were really curious. And then what happened was I looked at them and I realized that they looked down and then they looked out. But humans are one of these incredible, you know, species where we can look up.
Wow.
And not many species can do down, out, and up. And I just felt this incredible thing of what really is the work here? Are we actually just the eyes and the ears and the mouth in the songs and the dances that actually exist in all of the beings? And because we can actually look around just as much as we look down and look up. And maybe there's an ownership or responsibility about being a human for our other fellow non-human beings.
The greater the range, the greater the responsibility.
Perhaps so, yeah. And if you look at how you were talking about, you know, when we have rites of passage, you know, uninitiated, sitting in places of power, you know, how that affects how we look at nature, how we look at the land, how we look at water. And, you know, as an Indigenous person of these islands, I feel that we can speak of these places. We need to perhaps find platforms a bit like in the work that you do and what this is, to actually talk about it and to encourage people to have a little bit of desire and want, and maybe feel some grief in, I'm going to get back out there. I want to be a responsible human as part of this wonderful, beautiful whole. And maybe that's part of why we're here. Maybe. I don't know.
I'm firmly of the belief that the role of humans is to be in ceremony. I feel like I feel that this is what humans are here to do, just as much as the bees are here to pollinate. You know, our collective purpose is to do ceremony. And that's why it's in every culture, across every bit of land and every bit of history. And as devastating as it would be if the bees stopped pollinating, it is as devastating that the humans are not ceremonying.
I feel that the ceremony that you're talking about and the fact that, you know, it's not being done. I mean, I also don't want to sort of, I think we have to be careful sometimes with our language, because I know it is being done. And I think it's important that we don't often, you know, re-emphasize the spell of loss, and that we actually also focus not just on the scarcity of something, but also the abundance. And so there are people who, you know, and your listeners are probably going to be part of that, who actually do give a shit and actually are out there and want to be in ceremony in their own private spaces as well as perhaps collectively. And I feel that there is something where that ceremony, it does have a role, but I think there's something really natural about it. There's something natural that happens when you go out and you're sitting around a fire, for example. Somehow it's almost like you naturally want to burst into song. You naturally want to get up and dance with your feet. And for me, it's often that I think that part of being human is to sing and to move. We can call that dance, but, you know, to move. And almost that could be our role. And
to celebrate.
To celebrate just as much as it is to kind of like try to, you know, be in honor of all the mystery that happens around us, and try to, you know, dance in some rain or dance in some sunshine, because humans would have depended on that, as other creatures did too. But I think there's also, for me, there's the dancing, especially on these islands, which is actually about really turning into the mystery. Like when we dance, like the stone circles that we have on these islands, for me, they're dancing stones.
Why?
That's how they feel. It's like they feel like they used to dance. And I know that's completely, you know, sort of my own.
It makes perfect sense to me.
It feels like they used to dance. And and I don't know, I mean, sometimes I've had experiences where I recognize that people would gather around those stones, and that's part of the ceremony that they would do, is to dance in joy, and celebrate. But also somehow that the stones are somehow dancing. I can't find any other words. Dancing stones.
And why are dancing stones important in this flow?
I think that's because it's a reverberation of the hum of the universe.
So the universe is dancing.
When we dance, it's just us dancing the universe, and a universal dance. It's just acknowledging how in physics, everything knows that everything is jiggling around. So it's like we're just jiggling at the same time. You know, how one medicine man said to me, is how we do one thing is how we do everything. I contemplated on that for about 5 years. I thought, okay, I'm going to take this piece of wisdom and I'm going to try it out.
I'm going to test it.
I'm going to test it on every single person I meet. And he was absolutely bang on. Wow. And then what happened was I did my own sort of contemplation on it. I turned really into it. And what came up was how one thing is how everything is. That was the second part. And so somehow, you know, just us dancing is the same as the little jiggle that the universe is making as it expands, it spreads itself out, and everything is jiggling around. We're just jiggling the same.
And so if we're dancing, everything is dance.
Yes. But it's something about acknowledging that we are the universe, just as everything else is still the universe. I can't see anything in separation anymore. I don't know about you. I can't separate it out. It doesn't make sense for me to separate things out anymore.
I think when you work with land a lot, the land changes the way you think and perceive, because everything becomes common ground and communal. And this is part of the reason why we need to be in ceremony with land, to learn this or remember this. But one of the reasons this show exists is because I was really immersed in that viewpoint and being challenged by a lot of people who have a lot of other viewpoints about what's going on politically in the world right now, and where spirituality and politics are maybe conflicting in terms of... I was meeting many people who were feeling frustrated by spiritual concepts of oneness and fairness and equality, and feeling like it was just spiritual bypassing. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, my response to it was this show, and I was like, let's just get everyone on and start talking about it all then. And so because it's kind of naturally come here, I'd like to ask, from that viewpoint of if what we are is what's happening, how do we digest some of the things that are going on the 3D level of our global political reality right now?
How do we digest?
Or redress?
Well, for me, there's a part of what's actually occurring is actually a death.
Mm-hmm.
And
a rot.
I think the rot will come. I'm not sure we're at the rot. I think we're actually experiencing the sort of death throes of something that wants to stay in existence, but it can't. Mm-hmm. And I feel that for humans, it's very difficult to, and I can't speak for all of humanity. Of course I can't. But it's been my experience to see that people struggle with death, really, and that death is part of living. So I always see it as this is the practice of living and dying. Mm-hmm. And if we can't accept that something is old or something has gone or something is past, it stops us moving into a different kind of living. Because that exists, I think it's hard for people to take big chunks of what's actually going out in the world. So I see a lot of people unable to digest, and so that they move away from that because it's really painful. Mm-hmm. It's painful to see the acts of inequality. It's painful to see the disparity of affluence. For me, one of the things that troubles me is accessibility onto the land. That that so few people have so much access, and the majority of us have very little. Mm-hmm. And that disparity winds me up, literally winds me up. And when I'm wound up, I find it very difficult to digest it. And what happens is a sort of an anger, a rage, a sense of injustice, starts to boil inside of me. I'm quite a revolutionary. I believe that, as animism in action, there is a part that we have a responsibility to do something about this. How I digest it is that I take on my own ownership for all the things that I do. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that sometimes on occasion I can get lazy and I don't recycle or I forget. I can do that. I'm human. I'm like that. But I have to own it. Otherwise, I feel like I'm not digesting the current situation that we're in. Mm-hmm. What do we need to do? And there's so many things we could do. I feel that coming again back to coalescing on common ground with common values, I think being fierce, we're going to have to find our courage here. And I think that will enable us to digest some very difficult things. You know, we're at a time where we need to hear the stories of injustice that have happened in the past before we can move on to that common ground, but we need to have a sight of that common ground, because that, I'm not a great believer in hope, just to let you know. I know it's a radical thing to say. And I do think we need to, there's a bit more, we do need to be a little radical in our trust. I'm a believer in trust. And in trust, there's more action in trust than in hope. As you know, I am a huge advocate of prayer, and I don't feel that prayer is hope. I feel that prayer is action, really clear, directed action. So I feel that there are ways.
Can you define hope and trust?
Yeah, I think for me, hope is a much more waiting place.
It's interesting that hope was in Pandora's box.
Well, you know what? That's a really good story, because the story is apparently that all the ills of the human world, I think this is how it's phrased, something like that. I'm absolutely paraphrasing, is in the box, and every single one escapes except hope. So we hear that as a good thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it was in a box full of the
ills.
Now, don't get me wrong. If you are a people that has been so oppressed, or a person that's been so repressed, and you have nothing and no recourse of action, then hope is maybe all you do have. I am not diminishing.
And prayer. You always have prayer.
And prayer. I get that. And you know, I'm a huge fan of prayer. So I'm not diminishing hope in those circumstances, but I feel that trust is much more what we need to encourage in our young people, in our children. You know, mothers, I'm a mum. Mothers, you know, you can see a mother or a parent or even a friend. My life is full of story, but I won't bore you with lots of story.
You could never bore us.
Oh, okay. But I remember seeing a woman who was a friend of a couple who was so nervous holding the child's hand as it was crossing the road. And what happens is that gets transferred into the child. You know, and the words that we might say, like, don't run, you'll fall over. Well, that's, if you think of it, that's a spell. That's sort of telling us to not trust, as children, our ability to run. Plus, that it's actually okay to fall over. That's part of learning. It's not a mistake. It's learning. And so without those things, what we're really doing is we're often denying our trust within our young people, and they take that into their adulthood.
And again, this is where the passage comes in, because there has not been I've worked with many lands. I'm lucky I get to hummingbird shaman my way around the world. And there is not one land that hasn't put me in a position where I have to trust before I actually get to the ceremony. Like, there's always a moment, sometimes much longer than a moment, sometimes months, where I cannot see how it's going to work out. And the things I was relying on bottom out, and, you know, and and things go wrong. And I've come to learn that actually this is part of how the land is getting me ready. It's taking me into the liminal space, and how to operate in that liminal space in trust is part of the initiation. And if you don't get there, then you don't get to the magic and the rewards that are on the other side of it. And I feel that I actually kind of feel that these passages and ceremonies and old ways were taken from us, because had they not been, we wouldn't be so easy to control.
Yeah.
You know, we wouldn't be so easy to control with fear, because we wouldn't be afraid.
Yes.
And hope keeps you inside the box. Whereas trust is like, I'm staying outside of the box and we're going to work with what this is.
Yeah. I mean, you've said it so well and so beautifully in that. And so my head is turning because there's a magpie tapping on the window. And as you were speaking, there's two magpies. They've shown up at the door.
And then there's balloons going off on your screen.
They want to come in.
Let the magpies in. You know, we all have to go and look up the meaning of magpies. Do you know the meaning of magpies?
Well, yes, but I mean, it's not going back to his self-generated stuff. You know, I would say that we need to turn into what the magpie is trying to say to us, because this is about being in relationship with nature. Not trying to overlay what we think it means, but in the moment, what does it stir? It's tapping. It's saying, like, you know, I want to come in. So I don't, you know, I always just turn into that relationship. But going back to what you were saying is that there are many ways that the conquering was done, and obviously to diminish, you know, the spiritual context of the people, to take away their language,
and their land,
their rituals and ceremony, and also to kind of really, you know, instill fear into that. And a good way of doing that is so that the small person and the big person equally can't trust what's coming. And so then you do get left with hope. And that's what happens when oppression is so complete. And that's happened to so many people around the world, so many different peoples around the world.
Including in the United Kingdom.
Yes, you know, our oppression history here of our own indigeneity goes back 2,000 years. You know, the first known conquerors were the Romans. And we were a very tribal, you know, group here. You know, there were many tribes on these islands, and some of those tribes were very compliant and didn't mind, and then some did. And the Romans used a tactic, you know, to conquer, to colonize. But nothing ever really fully died. You know, things were often mixed and merged. You know, things were, they also were clever like that. They didn't try to completely eradicate. They often tried to merge. So you get this period of time in history where it's the Romano-British. And Bath shows a really good example of that, because the water deity there was called Sulis. And then she became known as Sulis Minerva, because Minerva was the Roman deity for water. So she became Sulis Minerva. So there's often this trying to merge the two things together so it's an easier transition. But things, you know, in a way, things don't ever really get forgotten. It's just, like we said before, they're kind of like they're in the cracks. They are in the history. And that's why there was a lot of appeal about your podcast, because it's looking at that transactional, as in the bits where it crosses, the intersectionality of history and politics and culture and society, as well as spirituality. And I think that, coming back to the original thing that you asked me, I think that there can be a lot of spiritual bypassing. if you want to call it that. A friend once described it to me. We put a spiritual sticky plaster over a human problem. Because human problems can be quite complex and difficult and messy. To clean out those wounds, that I feel that's the stage that we're at. Listening to all the oppression that's gone on, we're cleaning out the wound, and we're going to be some time before we're finished doing that. But if we can keep the focus on that intent of where we're going, it's about common ground, common value, then I think that gives us the direction. But getting used to being in the mess and the dirt and the rot, the liminality of it, we're going to have to get better at that, I feel. So that will help us digest, to recognize that not everything is going to be comfortable. And to expand the analogy maybe a bit too much, we're going to get a little bit have a little bit of indigestion every now and then. It's not. But
also, the land ultimately digests everything. If we take it to the land will. The land knows how to alchemize everything.
Yes.
Maybe not straight away.
That's the point. You said it before.
Over time,
I know.
Do it.
Yeah, modern humans have become pretty obsessed with immediacy and convenience. From the convenience shop at the bottom of the road to, sort of being able to buy a parcel and then you can get it the same day at 9:00 at night. It's like, it sets our brains up for everything to happen. I want it to happen straight away.
Which, as we're talking, I'm like, that's the loss of the passage too. Because what we have now is you are a teenager and then one day later you're an adult.
Well,
you don't have your right. You don't have your rite of passage, which teaches you that it is more than just an instant change.
Yeah, and most rites of passage guides would say that you have the severance part. So this would be like the teenager going out on a into a ceremonial space, and it probably isn't just one event. It's probably a number of events over a number of time. So they are initiatory experiences.
Several years. Yeah.
And they go out, so they have their severance away from what they knew, and they go out into the liminality, and then they come back. It's the incorporation part, that sort of embodying it, if you like, having it in the body, the alchemy that goes in the body. That's the bit that can take years. And maybe, there's an impatience with being human, or maybe it's part of modern humanity. I'm not 100% sure. It might be.
I think it's modern. I've spent a lot of time with Bedouins lately. I think it's modern.
Okay. And I think also, maybe, would you say that it's the industrial nations? I'm really cautious about constantly putting everything in the West, as in West versus East, North versus South. But I think if you look at industrial nations, they're used to, it's the effect of industrialization. You're used to things working really sort of like literally clockwork, smoothly, yeah.
We have got very addicted to things happening fast in industrial nations, for sure.
Yes. I mean, there's an author, I can't remember their name. They've written apparently a really good book. I haven't read it, but it's about dopamine, and it's about the instant gratification that we can get. And I think that we can also, the spiritual world shouldn't be somehow absolved from the effects of that. I quickly do my ceremony and there it is, it happens. It's it probably doesn't happen like that. And for me, there's the difference between being connected and then having relationship. Because my relationship with you is growing over time. My depth of understanding you, and the same with me, that the way of us meeting as two beings comes in relationship. It doesn't just happen because we have a connection.
No.
It comes because we spend time. And I feel that for me, that's that I want to keep talking about that. That's part of the work too, to be in relationship with, rather than I'm in connection. You know, a lot of people talk about, you know, they want to do nature connection work, but actually, okay, that's a good place to start, but it's really about relationship. You talked about symbiosis. It's actually about recognizing that that relationship is ongoing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, had this massive insight not that long ago where I realized that my channeling had become like an Amazon order. That I had this massive moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm speaking to these amazing guides and sentient beings and lands, but I'm treating it like an online transaction where I'm just like, what do I need to know? You know, like I'd lost all.
Yeah.
I actually put relationship into my channeling course as a theme after that, because I was like, no. We need to be less Deliveroo and more Amazon.
Yeah.
more roomy, less Amazon and Deliveroo and more roomy, because even when your life is dedicated to these things, we're so influenced by that pace of industrialization that we can accidentally just slip into very poor quality relationship.
Well, I think what you're touching on here is something that I discovered when I was out in my van. So I was holding a question. I went out listening, holding the question of what might it mean to belong. And underneath that was like, I guess you could call it a more academic sense, but it wasn't really. It was like, well, what's the consequences of the absence of rites of passage in our culture? And it was looking at the relationship between rites of passage and our sense of belonging. And so when I went out, I listened to, like I said, I listened to the mountains, I listened to the oceans, I listened to the peaty soil. That was a really interesting experience, burying myself in some peaty soil. I went in a hole in the ground in a wonderful cave in Ireland called Onwigat, which means the cave of Maeve's cat.
Wow.
Song came out of that. That was amazing. I was in pitch black and the acoustics were incredible. Anyway, so I did some pretty wild shit things and it was great. But I happened to speak to some really interesting people. And I asked the question, what does belonging mean to you? Sometimes they responded and they said what it might mean. And sometimes they thought it was a question and that somehow there was an answer, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? And then sometimes they did something really amazing. They told a story. And one of the themes that's coming out of that project, and it will be written up, and it's going to be some work that will go on the land, in ceremony. It'll be intergenerational. I'd love it if you were involved. I'd love it if people listening would like to get involved. And it's creative. And it's with using the hands, which I think is important. Was one of the facets of our sense of belonging relies on the quality of our relationship. Exactly what you said. Because if there were people who talked about, I remember one woman I met. This is also in Ireland, and I said to her, I asked her the question, so what does it mean to you? And she just went, it's all of this. And she sprung her arms out and she said, it's all of this nature. It's all of that. And every single pore was oozing with her joy and exuberance about being in a wild sort of place, being in nature and what it did for her. And we went on to have a conversation. It's one of the things I've discovered, that maybe I was this artist in dialogue or this artist in conversation. And she talked about that was a lifetime of being out. She realized she was really privileged. She'd worked in a school for like 30 odd years and been quite contained. But every single holiday she would go out into super wild places. And now she's retired. And now she was out in the wild and she just loved it. And made her sense of belonging have weight, because it was about the relationship she'd had all of her life with nature. In different parts of the world, it wasn't necessarily related to place, although obviously it was nature place, but it was actually just nature being out. It was so beautiful. I cried so many times when I was out, because I was astounded by how people responded to such a basic question. And I wonder about that. I wonder about that for you. And these are maybe, it's rhetorical, and also for the people who listen to this, what might it mean for us to belong? And I happen to feel that I think relationship with the land, ceremony, ritual on the land, actually increases our senses of belonging.
100%. For me, ceremony is how we are in relationship.
Yeah.
With the land.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever. I'm so grateful I'm in relationship with you. You're amazing.
It's mutually felt. It's absolutely mutually felt.
And yes to any project ever. Tell us more. Send us the link to that project. It sounds amazing.
Of course.
But I have a question for you before we finish.
Okay, what's that?
Who should we have on the show next?
Oh, my word. I didn't know that question was coming. Who should do next? I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, there's a thing inside of me. I wonder if there's a person that it's sort of outside the so-called spiritual world, who could talk about their relationship with the land and how they are engaged with it. And I wonder if we could hear and see the remnants of something in that person's practice, maybe their working life or just their relationship with the land, that might somehow resonate with how it is when you go out with a specific intent. And I wonder if we'd see more similarities than we would differences. Maybe we might see more differences with similarities. But I think there's something around the ordinariness. I wonder if there's something ordinary. I don't know. Is that like a wild...
If you find a person like that, will you come on with that person?
Yes.
And we'll continue this conversation.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
We'll continue this relationship.
All right.
That'd be interesting. I feel like you should come on. That's what I'm feeling. Like, it'd be interesting to compare the two ways to be with the land.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to do that again. It's been a treat, a pleasure. It's a blessing to be in your company too. I always feel at complete ease. And going back to what we were talking about, there's just trust, and I don't have to think about my trust. I don't have to contort myself. I'm just me, and I consider that a gift that you give me. Thanks.
Well, thank you. You just inspire me in the same way that the land inspires me. You inspire me to know.
Well, in that sense, my last final words is that who you're really in relationship with me is you're really in relationship with my mother. And you are, it's true. And you're really in relationship with her mother and her mother and her mother.
Oh, so beautiful.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, honey.
May the land be with you all. If today's episode touched your heart and you want to come into greater relationship with Mother Earth, visit landtantra.com and get involved. Your truth is part of this conversation, and we would love you to reach out on socials and let us know how it landed. And if it really inspired you, we hope you share it with others. Let's add more wow to our world.